everybody. I'm just going to get started because you're all here and it's really exciting. My name is Angela Matusik. I'm thrilled to be moderating this panel. I'm a brand marketer and occasional documentary filmmaker as well. So cross all the lines. And we're going to be talking about something very near and dear to my heart, something that is a topic of a lot of conversation, which is where do brands fit in the filmmaking process? What is the relationship that brands and filmmakers have? And today we're going to talk about something really specific, which is documentary and nonfiction work. So we have a few films that we'll be discussing today. The Price of Milk, which was funded by Oatly. Full Circle, the first all-black Everest ascent by REI, not by REI, helped by REI. Theory of Tea, which was sponsored by Yogi Tea and Robeson from North Face. And I have an incredible panel here with me. Sitting right next to me is Sarah Fletcher, VP of Corporate Affairs North America from Oatly. Then we have Nicholas Bruckman, founder of People's Television Inc. and the director of the series The Price of Milk. Sitting next to him is my frequent collaborator, Amy Slotnick, Senior Vice President of Passion Point Collective and a producer of 2 brand films in this year's Tribeca X. And then at the end, we have, last but not least, Justice A. Whitaker, co-director of Full Circle, the first all-black Everest ascent. So, yes, give them a round of applause for finishing and showing their films. It's all very exciting. So like I said, these films are all very different, even though we have a couple of sporting, climbing, ascent things happening. But they do all share one thing, which is that the funding came from brands. So let's just kick that off. Nicholas and Sarah, let's start with your series, The Price of Milk. Do you want to give us a little bit of an intro to that? And then maybe I know you have something we could take a peek at.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good. Thanks for coming, everybody. Thanks, Impact Lounge, all the panelists. A lot of my friends are here. Appreciate you guys coming out. I'm Nick Bruckman. I run a production company called People's TV. I also direct documentaries and have had several projects in the festival here, including The Price of Milk, which I worked on with Sarah and her team at Oatly. And The Price of Milk tells the untold story of the Got Milk campaign of the 1990s and America's absurd relationship with milk and the dairy industry. And it was made possible through our partnership with Oatly, which we'll talk about some more. And should we do the rest of the projects and hear more about them, or did you want to?
Sure. Let's go down the road, and then we'll come back, circle back to the Oatly clip. So, Amy, tell us a little bit about the theory of spice and Robeson.
Sure. I'm with Passion Point. We call ourselves a movie studio for brands. We manage production and executive producing services, but then also work with the brands to achieve impact, distribution, marketing, PR, festivals, sort of what a traditional movie studio will do. So the theory of spice was with Yogi Tea and a very unconventional documentary, 6 minutes long. We knew it didn't have traditional distribution, goals, but we made a partnership with the LA Times studios to promote it and run it through their LA Times short docs series, and also included a lot of editorial, which was important to Yogi to get their message out about sustainable spice products that they have.
And Justice, can you tell us a little bit about your film and what brings you to this brand panel today?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. It's such an important conversation. First, a requisite shout out to my co-collaborator, who is also in the house, and co-director Rolla K. Bamboshe, co-producer, and the film is really a partnership in that way creatively. And we were blessed to have had REI Studios as the first money in on a film that is about an Everest expedition by the first all-black group of climbers, Full Circle Expeditions, to do so. And Everest films are their own mountain to climb, and it was really amazing that REI was interested and able to kind of give us that jump start and that, endorsement behind the project. And many other projects also in the last few years have also been, connected with brands. Nick and I just did something with the National Urban League. And also I did a large project that was DC Comics, HBO, and Ally Bank. Ally Bank was actually, a large part of the financing behind that. So I've been seeing this happening, and it's also where many of the opportunities for me as a storyteller have presented themselves. So that sort of intersection has become very important, and happy to be here on the panel.
We have a lot to discuss. So let's take a look first at the price of milk.
It could be the best known phrase in advertising.
Got milk?
Got milk?
Got milk.
Turns out that didn't sell a lot of milk.
The ad agency is making money, but I don't think we're making any money as dairy farmers.
I think milk is a symbol of America. Like apple pie and the American flag.
Milk with the muscles in it.
Milk's about the best thing I can drink right now.
You drank milk, and now...
Oh, hi. My mom drinks milk all the time, but I don't drink milk.
When I drink milk, I don't like it.
Milk consumption is down 42% from what it was a half century ago.
The heyday of milk is over.
Drink and eat dairy products. It's good for you, especially ice cream.
The dairy lobby is one of the strongest lobbies in Washington.
So good.
There is a government-backed program that is single-handedly responsible for getting dairy products into fast food.
She's in the show.
It might not all be on the up and up.
They've been driving the family farms out of business.
We're being robbed by people who are unscrupulous and protected by the government.
What do you do when you have a lot of milk you need to get rid of?
They decided to put their products into the bellies of our children.
Moo Brew is taking the one thing kids like, and that's coffee, but it's allowing them to get what they need, which is milk.
Gen Z doesn't like milk, and a really big reason is climate change.
Dairies are producing so much methane.
So that's burping and farting together.
Both. The methane that's generated on our farms, it might look like a problem, but it's an opportunity.
This is taxpayer money, and it is going into a private industry. It's a pool of...
The problem is big agriculture and big dairy are looking to make as much profit as possible. And Congress and the USDA is allowing them to do it.
I love me some Milky.
Well done. Okay, so Sarah, I believe that this concept or the desire for this film series originated with the brand. Is that correct? Can you tell us a little bit about the motivation there?
Sure, yeah. So I'm with Oatly. I have a terrifyingly corporate title that I'm working on. But, and yeah, we exist as a counterpoint to an existing product that's so deeply part of culture all over the world, and particularly in the United States. And so part of the job of Oatly is also setting up the premise of why are you drinking what you're drinking? And so that is something that we ask every single day. But when you're a brand, people assume that you're asking it because you want them to buy your product, which is true. We want them to buy oat milk. And so I think in my role in the company, my job is helping to create the stories and then go tell the stories. And often I would be talking to journalists or talking to policymakers, and they'd be like, why do you keep talking about dairy subsidies? Why are you talking about like school milk? Why are you talking about these pieces? And there was always a grain of salt. You know, we're a brand that has to sell a product. And so when the idea of a documentary came around, I was like, well, that's fantastic to find something that's a step removed from us, that's a step removed from the sales, to say this is a bigger story than oat milk. This is a bigger story than oat milk. This is something that's relevant to people's lives, not just consumers' lives. And so to find independent filmmakers to be able to do that with us was fantastic. And I think it took a lot of bravery on my team's part too to say, okay, well, how do we draw the line, right? I went to journalism school. I know where those lines are. Many of my colleagues did too. How do we decide how much of a role to play? And so that was a kind of careful dance to make sure that that was the case. And so I think if you watch the series, you can actually see there's, you know, this is not an ad for Oatly. This is not even really an ad for or against milk. It's a real conversation about what the actual topic is. So yeah, that was kind of the impetus of all of it. And I was the beneficiary at the end of the day because I can point to it and say, this isn't coming from us. There's a funding piece there, but this is a bigger story than us, and take a look at it and then hear what we have to say about it.
So Nicholas, tell us a little bit about your side of the relationship. And I understand it's taken quite some time for the film to be made, and it came out last year. So your connection with your brand partner has been a long one.
Yep.
Tell us about the creative process and where you were able to draw the line, and what the push and pull may have been a little bit.
Yes, thank you. So, and that was awesome to hear, Sarah. I haven't heard you articulate it in that way before. I caught wind in 2022 from my management at Range Media that Oatly was interested in supporting a documentary that could be about anything as long as it was about milk.
That's pretty broad.
There was no mandate other than that. And I was like, cool, like, is there a brief? And, I'm very used to the world of marketing and branded work because in addition to independent documentary, I also run a commercial production company doing more traditional marketing work. And so wear both hats, but they're usually in very distinct lanes. And those Venn diagrams, and I think what this whole panel is about is that those lines blurring. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Sounds really boring. What could be cool about milk? And because I want to make this happen, I think it could be, ironic and interesting and subversive in some way, especially if they're not going to control it or tell the directors exactly what to do. And myself, along with my co-director, Yoni Brook, and our producer, Jen Malak, started to do some research and investigation right away into the Got Milk campaign, because that was our touch point as elder millennials that we all knew and remembered. And what we discovered very quickly is that the Got Milk campaign, much like various other programs that you'll have heard of in a second, are called checkoff programs. It's a very obscure USDA program that is already putting everybody to sleep. But you'll know what the advertising is. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Pork, the other white meat. The touch, the feel of cotton, the fabric of our lives. So all of those are programs that producers are forced to pay into. And we were aware of that fact, but our producer, Jen, got in touch with some dairy farmers that had tried to take the campaign down to the Supreme Court, because it turns out that small farmers hate these programs because all they do is siphon their money. They're forced by Congress to pay in to the big farmers who benefit, because it's all generic advertising, a small artisanal dairy farmer trying to do the right thing by their animals and agriculture, et cetera. It doesn't benefit from an ad that says Got Milk, 2 words. And Jen got the guy who came up with Got Milk, Jeff Goodby, to say, yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. Yes, it's the most famous advertising campaign in all of history. He won basically every award, and it's pretty much considered, after the Budweiser Frogs, which he also came up with, to be the greatest ad campaign of all time. But he realizes the harm that it has caused to many farmers, which is essentially what the story is about. And when we realized there was an angle on the story that was from the perspective of dairy farmers, but supported by Oatly, we thought maybe there's a version of this that could actually travel, actually go to film festivals, and not feel like it was brand marketing. And that was like the core of the idea that we pitched to them ultimately and began this long partnership. As you said, it was about 3 years.
What I love about that is that there's so obviously like research and journalism and finding the story first. So tell just before we start talking about some of the other projects too, like during the process, like how involved was Oatly or its executives? Like, did they check in with you a lot? Did you have to show them clips of the films as they were being made? Like, what was your relationship like?
Yeah, so we sent a proposal for them to approve, and very notably, we did retain editorial control over the film, and that's a really important question for all of these projects.
So that was in your contract?
Yeah, that was in our contract. They did have, and maybe Sarah can speak more to this side, like legal and factual and defamation review, and we went through. They were very cautious as a big corporation, as you might expect, but we did do real investigative journalism in the series. We filed FOIA requests. We accuse evil dairy farmers of committing actual crimes. There's real stakes in the story. And I think they were very brave and kind of great as a partner in letting us do that. And part of the reason I'm up here kind of talking about it and excited to have Sarah here is to show the results when brands take risks like this, that great stories can come out that do play in the actual Tribeca Film Festival.
And more importantly, I think part of the public consciousness and conversations, right?
Of course.
Which, and Amy, I know that you've done some work with a lot of films, and you mentioned even with your theory of spice that it got some earned attention. So I think, could you talk a little bit about that sort of motivation about telling a story that as both the filmmakers and the brands might sort of catch some attention and that is going to get talked about and sort of move the needle one way or another?
Yeah, I think earned PR is a big motivation and a big objective for brands when they go into something like this. They want people to be talking about it and people to be writing about it. And Yogi was the same. This went through their foundation, and they very much wanted media to cover what the foundation was doing and their environmental goals and how they were supporting local farmers in Guatemala and India and Sri Lanka, where the film was shot. And so we succeeded with a fair amount of PR. However, it's hard with brand films because, journalists see that there is the grain of salt that you mentioned, that they're trying to sell a product. But in this case, you never see Yogi in the film. There's no talking heads of people talking about Yogi tea. So it feels more organic. And so it did get some PR coverage.
And Justice, I know you're telling, the story you're telling, sort of like the earned media came first in a way, right? Because I just saw a Today Show clip from a few years ago with the team talking about their accomplishment. So can you tell us a little bit about just the journey of the film? When did you decide to make the film about this team? Yeah. And then at what point did REI come in?
Yeah, the film always, as the filmmakers, Rolla Kay and I always had the objective of making like a piece of cinema and a documentary that would be feature length and that would premiere at an amazing festival like Tribeca. So that was always the goal, and the brand support never really like deterred us from that. The actual inception of the project came through a personal relationship with one of the athletes on the team. So he and I have known each other for 15 years and have been looking for a way to tell his story about how the outdoors really impacted his life, living with PTSD as a veteran. And so this opportunity for him to climb the mountain became an opportunity for he and I, and then ultimately for our production company. But REI, like you said, the media was there. The team has their own life, and that was important. They had their own press. Part of that influenced how people saw the team, and that a lot of people had actually heard of this story as we began to engage looking for financing. And so that definitely helped us. That was amazing. And REI, like Nick is saying, they understood that there was a risk, but also that the story was important. And that's what we can ask for, from brands, right? Is that they hear and see and are made aware of important stories and understand their positionality and being able to bring those forth. And also similarly, REI was like really present at the beginning and really present at the end, and gave us the autonomy that we needed. And of course, we had our other collaborators, Confluential Films and Westbrook, as producing partners. And so all of the creative and producing work was being done, with that group.
Yeah, I'd love to just hover on that point for a moment, because I think it's really interesting that it seemed like, I don't know, even just a few years ago, there was really only one equation that was happening for brand-funded films, which is that the brand has the idea, the brand hires the filmmaker, and the brand holds all the ownership afterwards. So I think it's really interesting, Justice, that you had REI come in, but then you had other funding too. So can you talk about that? And then maybe we'll just go to Amy and Nick to talk a little bit about the other types of film funding that you're aware of too.
Yeah, old formulas are really just waiting to be broken, and it's critical. And I have, as I mentioned, seen so much brand awareness growing, and with that goal, right? I mean, there's $1 million commercials being shot that are 30-second spots. Let's make a 2-hour film with the same amount of money.
Yeah, or 4 short ones anyway.
Right, yeah.
So Oatly did do a Super Bowl commercial the year before you guys
spend $1 million on it. That was
okay, never mind.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, and even for so many artists and storytellers, there are, fine, $50,000, right? And like a lot of storytellers would be overjoyed to tell stories that are close to their own home. I know Patagonia does a lot of films in that space, and they're looking for things that are going to send the message of what the brand is about rather than just plug the brand. And I think that, is what we see with the price of milk, what we see with REI, that they support people getting out into the outdoors, and want to be a resource for people that might not have done that and need to go find their first pair of hiking boots. So
it's perfectly aligned with their mission,
right,
which I think is really the secret. A lot of filmmakers ask questions like, how can I do this? How can I get somebody to pay for the film that I want to make? And it always is like you have to be able to go back to the brand because, ultimately if the brand is going to invest money and time and resources internally to a project, that has to be very closely aligned with their mission or a goal. Sarah, can you just speak to that a tiny bit?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it also speaks to the earned media piece, right? Like I work on trying to get us earned media, and often not just about a product launch. We want to be talking about the impact of milk on climate change and why that would necessitate a shift toward more plant-based options like Oatly. Or we want to talk about, like, as we're talking about ultra-processed foods, like what does that mean, and can processing be good? All of those pieces. It's a complicated story to tell as a brand. And so I think that you have to think about what your tools are, and again, like when you can align on what that shared vision is or that shared mission, then it kind of becomes something that you can hold hands on, for sure. Yeah.
And Amy, because I feel your company, Passion Point, as you mentioned, you're like the film studio for brands in a way. Like this is a conversation you have constantly, right? So can you just speak a little bit more about what you hear? Have you seen any shifts, or is it the traditional model still holding? How are brands approaching filmmaking, and especially nonfiction filmmaking these days?
For us, most of our brands and the brand films that we make, the brand owns the content and they have editorial control. However, I love it when I hear about, REI's model and Oatly's model where they're giving more filmmaker freedom. And we do have a couple projects where the brand is putting in money, but we are still trying to fund it in addition to that from different kinds of investments. So it varies, and I think, it's a bit brave for a brand to put their trust in a filmmaker without any, real control. But some are doing it, and I hope more do.
Please say something about that, Nick.
Cool. Yeah, so at People's TV, alongside this case study, we have others that have done some other long-form projects with Justice that are also this kind of social impact, longer-form docs. And our basic thesis is that long-form is back because, as you can see, IRL is back. And a lot of brands are spending huge amounts of money, obviously, on social and creators, which we're all for, and we do that work as well. I think there's a lot of synergy between the creator work and the long form work, but we also know that people, no matter how many views the reels get, people don't remember 2.2 reels ago that they watched. They can't remember 3 reels ago. Versus everybody at this panel who even watched that trailer, or better yet, come to an impact screening of The Price of Milk or of the Yogi Tea film, or come to Tribeca, they're going to remember that experience. There's ways to evaluate. We talk with some of our clients, especially foundations, about evaluating and the brand sentiment, or even the sentiment on the topic lift that you get after having a shared cinema experience, which is why we all got into this business in the first place. So I think there's a real ROI and use case that filmmakers can make to brands for why, yes, they want to get this message out, but not just this message, it's this format. Why does this documentary format still work? I think is an important case that we as filmmakers and brand marketers need to make to the purse string holders.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because the long form documentary has been around for a little while, quite some time, and brands have been using it. But I do think you're right in saying there's a shift now, and like a hunger for things that are real, hunger for things that we can trust, that build reputation. But when it comes to long form, what are your hopes as far as audiences? Like, do brands value things like a screening at the Tribeca Film Festival?
Yes.
Definitely, yes.
I would say so, yeah. One thing that comes to mind, we were talking about this a little bit, and I heard it last week in a question that was really smart to a bunch of different brands, but like, can people have parasocial relationships with companies or with brands? And the answer was yes. But when you think about like your actual friends, you don't want to just hear at every single party or every time you hang out, I do this for work. You want to hear about the rest of their life as well. You want to hear what they care about. You want to hear dimension in them. I would say that's probably the same thing for brands as well. And so I think the opportunity of long form is that it lets you see what a brand invests in, what a brand actually cares about, and think about like, okay, does that actually jibe with what I'm thinking, and does that make me think about them differently and want to hear more from them? And there's a diversity in how they talk and what they talk about. And so I think that's true for media format too, right? You can't just see the same reel or the same 30-second TV ad or YouTube ad over and over and over again. To be able to get something that's a little bit different, you then get a different dimension of what the brand cares about too. So,
Justice.
Yeah, I just, I think there's a lot of names depending on where you come from, but like audience, however your brand is thinking about it, in a lot of ways, I think that's an uphill battle for brands right now. Like capitalism is making corporations look bad in so many different ways, even if they're good corporations. Yeah, capitalism has that. It's like infectious, the bad rap. But yeah, so I think that this idea of trying to humanize themselves as a brand, trying to put forth the values that may have started a legacy company years ago, decades ago, or oftentimes you see new leadership who are younger and looking for new ways to communicate and connect with people. And like, not all brands and businesses are bad by the nature, and so like, where does that place? And I think that creativity is actually what is become this conversation in this room. There's a desire to say like, this is a real story about a real person in a nonfiction format where we actually spent 18 to 54 minutes telling these important stories. Why would we do that? You figure out why we would do that. And that's actually engaging, and to Nick's point about the short form and the reels, but also I think it's so much easier to display authentic compassion, authentic values of a brand, which we know capitalism says has the same rights as people, but like, do they have the same emotion? You know what I mean? Like there's still people leading these things. And it's hard for all of us to be out in the world trying to discern from those brands. We don't really know. And a lot of times it just feels like, oh, this is another attack on me. This is another ad to me. And if you can start circumventing that and like communicating in more human ways, then I think that goes along, make some distance.
And that's why the festivals are important. And I think, not to speak for Sarah, but when we have conversations with brands, they're excited about that because you actually, despite what people think, cannot buy your way into the Tribeca Film Festival. There's nobody you can't write Jane Rosenthal a check or Bobby or anybody, no matter whether you're, Oatly or, SpaceX. You have to make something good and credible that audiences will respond to, because there's a team of skeptical programmers that are going to watch this, that are all like art house film nerds that are going to really know better than anybody.
Facts.
Yeah, and so
Yep.
so it's not so much that, yes, you can talk to brands and show them kind of like red carpet and prestige, and it was like amazing having the Oatly team come to Tribeca and do that. But the main thing is that the laurels signify that the project to audiences is authentic and credible. And that goes even further on streaming. And I can announce for the first time in this room that The Price of Milk will be streaming on Documentary Plus, which is a new doc-only streamer, on July 4th. So check it out. We're really excited about that and working with Oatly on that release. But similarly, with some exceptions, you still need, there are certain streaming and certain digital media buys you can make that have the appearance of real distribution, but for the most part, it is a signal of a real acquisition by real audience demand for the story.
I'm going to ask one question and then we're tossing it to the audience. Sarah, I just wanted to ask you specifically as we hear about all this. So how do you make sure that your brand gets the halo, gets the desired outcome from these screenings? If there's no brand in the stories, there's just a little mention at the end, what do you have to do to make that connection?
Sure. I think that my shareholders may not like this. I don't know. A lot of the work that I end up doing with my team is like kind of unseen. It's out in communities. I talk to a lot of farmers who are either growing oats or who are like milking dairy. I talk to a lot of lawmakers who are writing the policy that is at the bottom of all of this. And so what we were able to do with the series was actually do a pretty short impact screening series as well. So we showed it at Climate Week at Cooper Union, which was awesome, with a bunch of student activists and folks who are involved in the climate space. And we're able to kind of like demonstrate the connection between food and climate, and specifically milk and climate, and kind of what works and isn't working. We were able to take it to a screening at University of Wisconsin-Madison with a big scary room of dairy farmers who wanted to get into the nitty-gritty of like, well, okay, well, what the hell do we do now? And why would Oatly want to talk to us about this and have that conversation? And then after all of that, we went to Capitol Hill and we had a screening at the Capitol Hill Visitor Center, invited like a bunch of different offices from both sides of the aisle to say, like, one of the big scary things that you don't want to do is touch dairy policy. Why would an oat milk brand want to talk about dairy policy? It's hard for me to have that conversation in the room with them as a lobbyist, but to have this film lay it out, you can actually push that forward. So for me, it's a tool for long systemic change. And I think what comes of that are ideally baby steps, policy changes, et cetera, that then we have credibility to be able to speak about because we're deeply involved. So I think it hopefully will also have further legs. We found that universities just want to show it on their own. They've got student groups of food nutrition students that want to kind of like dig into it a little bit more. It's starting to kind of just have legs on its own because people know that the story is relevant to them. And so it gives us a place to live in that world.
That's what's so wonderful about nonfiction films is they have such long lives, and you don't get that from a reel, and you don't get that from a Super Bowl ad. So let's hope more of these partnerships happen. All right, questions from the audience? Is there a mic that people are passing around? Okay, tall gentleman in the back.
Hi, thank you guys so much. For the independent filmmakers in the room, how do we actually go about like approaching these brands? You know, like, is it someone on the marketing team? Is it like, how do we find
That's a great
that
question.
path? Thank you.
We did talk about this in our pre-call, and we think, you do sort of need to learn a little bit about how corporations are structured, and you need to find an advocate. So one way to do that is to sort of look at people's titles. And one thing you should know when you go into these things is that people who work in marketing, many times their job is to move products. So that's why somebody like Sarah, who has the very corporate title that you are ashamed of, but it's great in corporate affairs, it could be a really great advocate for you.
Yeah, we're maybe a bad example because our whole company structure is not something that is modeled in other places. And interestingly, I wasn't involved from the very beginning. Actually, this was our global content studio who led this and let me peek occasionally at the 45-page dossier of research that came in. But I didn't touch it because I was kind of touching all of the communications and marketing. And so I would say, yeah, look for content folks for sure, people who have journalism backgrounds. And also I would say look for brands that do have mission or something that like aligns with whatever story you're trying to tell, because otherwise you're jerry rigging and kind of like trying to fit something in with maybe one person who might leave in a year or leave in 6 months. If it's a 3-year project, that's a problem.
That's a great point.
I was just going to say that, like, also doing your own research and getting there, like, there's a global content studio. Some brands, when you see that language, it's like vocab work, and you're like, okay, I know that the marketing, that's important, but they're not just marketing and selling product because they have a studio. So paying attention, LinkedIn is great for that. Takes a lot of time though, and like I'm a teacher at Pratt. I tell my students that you really have to get in and pay attention. Going on YouTube and looking at this type of content, going to the credits, there's the name of the person you need to talk to. Now you need to find out how to develop an authentic relationship that's not transactional with that person. And do you have someone that works at that brand or a friend that might be able to begin that process? So it really takes time developing those relationships, and they do need to be authentic if you want to succeed and put in the kind of work that it takes to make these kinds of projects.
Right here in the third row.
how would like the brand kind of like help with that, especially with that level of writing?
The question was about if you're making a film about
cults
like, and religious beliefs. Okay,
like it's a very taboo like conversation.
Well, this is something. And I'm sorry, I'm going to blur the lines a little bit here because I have experience in this too. But it's like the thing about brand-funded films is that they want to see what they're getting out of it, and I think Sarah hit upon this too. Is like you have to understand like. Does this brand care about the same things that your film cares about? And there's no denying that we are in a time right now where brands are being cautious. We're living in a very cautious time. Everybody's afraid they're going to say the wrong thing, piss the wrong person off. And so risky subjects are riskier than ever when it comes to brand funding. So you really have to do your deep research to think about which brands would be comfortable with your subject matter, and it takes a creative eye to think about everything you're covering. Maybe there's another way in that's about something else that's not about the subject, but something in the peripheral that could work.
I have one other thing to say that I think can be useful in your conversations with brands is I figured this out in 2009 when I was like working on my first film as basically an assistant on a documentary set in the Bronx that was on PBS POV about the Ghanaian community there. And my job was to like email every small business that I could think of and ask them for money. And I was like, first name dot last name at corporation.com. And finally, the guy from like BJ Liquors, which had a big store in that neighborhood, like a big chain store, said, well, are you guys going to have any kind of public release? Because we'd love to like have a screening and throw you guys a party and bring a bunch of booze. And that is something that we continue to talk about 15 years later, which is that especially if you have an existing idea, which I think are much harder to pitch, although possible, than trying to really tailor a creative idea to a brand's mandate or mission, you might have more luck getting them to fund some of the distributive elements, because also that's an area where they can have more control or participation, because you don't want their logo or editorial control over the film itself, but you certainly don't mind bringing them onto a panel with your subjects or having their CEO come and speak at an event alongside your film and be engaged and participatory, or have their logo on the merch that's given out at the screening. So I would really think about that piece of it as a possible area for funding. And we've had some success with that, with projects that weren't necessarily funded by the brand.
I don't know if it's appropriate for me to jump in. I'm curious, for each project represented on the panel, if you could speak about your initial conversation for your series, for your film, like how this got started. I understand it's a vast landscape, but getting away from generalities, how did the stories that you created in conjunction with brands happen from the start, like that first conversation?
We kind of did ours already, so you guys should go.
Yeah, Amy, why don't you talk a little bit about the theory of spice and maybe the Patagonia film, which we haven't heard much about.
Oh, the North Face.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'll
sorry.
talk about that one. The North Face that's okay.
I did that. Farms documentary.
That's okay. No, Patagonia makes great films too.
Yeah, no, exactly. I just put that in your head. Sorry.
The North Face is one of a few brands that does have an in-house content team, and they mostly, though, fund projects about their the athletes that they sponsor who go on incredible expeditions, although they do often give in-kind support to other films that's not their own athletes. But for a film that we just did with them called Trango, prior to the one in Tribeca X, we were able to do actually a theatrical release where we released it in theaters in small ski towns, sort of in the memory of like those old Warren Miller films in ski towns that would play. And it was met with some of their goals to engage more directly with their core audience and get them to support North Face. And then we have now gotten it on PBS in Colorado, and it's going to be going out nationally on PBS and also VOD streaming. And it's on Documentary Plus.
Congrats. And you won Tribeca X last night with the Yogi T.
That was the Yogi T film, won Environmental Impact Award.
Congratulations.
And it just to circle back, because I think the question was too like about like
I know, I
what is
didn't
that
really-
initial conversation? And I mean, I worked at a brand and we worked with filmmakers, and some our conversations would often come with like a collaborator like Passion Point, who we would put out kind of like a brief or an RFP to filmmakers we admired. And then they would send us their ideas, and we would really pick them based on that. Like it would be amazing to me that some of the biggest names would just kind of send you stuff that seemed like they just were, at the time, like Googling things. And you're like, it was the people that would really do the research, like what Nicholas was talking about, they did for Price of Milk. Like, so it's just like anything. Like if you want to be connected to a brand, you need to have a good portfolio, and it doesn't have to be just brand work, but you need to make sure that you are talent and that you're real and in the conversations of the rooms that are happening too.
I was just going to say that there's so many different ways that the first conversation happens, like in different branded setups. We've had brands who came to us because they heard about the project, brands that had their own RFPs, and you were the right person for it. So that first conversation is just like, tell me everything you want out of this film from the brand. And then, you get to start ideating. So it kind of happens like everything in this industry, different each time.
Front row.
I am curious about the narrative space, and if anybody can speak to if you've seen brands collaborate in that space versus documentary, because as you talked about, Nick, there's usually like a very specific mandate that the brand wants to have. So if anyone has experience or can speak to that, I would be interested. Also, thank you. This has been a very elucidating conversation.
Happy birthday!
Happy birthday.
There was a brand-funded movie at Sundance that was narrative funded by Hyundai this year that got, so these things exist. That's all I have
Yeah.
to say.
Perfect Day by Wim Wenders, right? My favorite example.
We worked on a scripted film that Affleck made, and it was actually animated and told the story of a girl whose father was sick, and they really needed their medical insurance. But it was a very short film, and at the end, one of the characters in the film was a duck. The girl meets a duck, and but it doesn't say Affleck anywhere in the film. And we were screening at a film festival, and the credits rolled, and it then said Affleck, and people then put it together and started laughing and applauding because they realized the duck was the Affleck duck. And so it was those little things that can tie to a brand, and the brand used it as part of a bigger initiative. So I think scripted can work, but it's definitely harder and often takes more funding.
Are we trying to wrap up? Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm being told that we're out of time because everybody's running a little late today. You can talk to us.
Can we get a
after the,
selfie with all of you guys? Can you guys come here
Yeah.
really quick? Yeah, like that. Yeah,
got a
this is good.
documentary.
This is going to be really good. I can tell. I just need to see
Audience
everybody.
selfie.
Get in there, Justice. All right. If you can't see yourself, I can't see you. All right. Thank you. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.